Hello, everyone. It's a great honour and privilege to be asked by my friend Bill Mousoulis to speak for a few minutes about this very remarkable film made by Peter Tammer, Journey to the End of Night. Now, I have an incredibly vivid memory of watching this film over 40 years ago now, 1982. And the impact that it had not only on me but on many viewers in Australia and in other countries as well. And it's intriguing to think about the impact of this film, on one's mind, on one's memory, and that 40-year period, because the film itself is about a 40-year memory. This man that we see, Bill Niamh, soldier in New Guinea, and he is 40 years past the events that he recounts in the film. Obviously, he's completely haunted by his experiences, his experience of killing somebody, the whole moral ambiguity of that, of being a soldier in war, sort of trained to kill the enemy, trained to hate the enemy. And yet, as it were, in his own mind, he took a step too far into madness, into pure hatred. He says, in religious terms, there was nothing but hatred in here, in my heart. And of course, later, when he, returned to military base, to Australia, and so on, he was ostracised for having committed that act. So it's a guy who's living in all this sort of ambiguity and contradiction of war, and it's as if he has to bear this nightmare and this ambiguity for the rest of his life until he dies. That's what he says. I'll be haunted by this every day of my life until he dies, and he seeks some kind of forgiveness. Of course, he's even at one point speaking to God, and of course he doubts whether there is any forgiveness for him, just as one can doubt whether there's any real justice or retribution or honour in wartime. Now, what makes Journey to the End of Night so special is its approach as a film. It's not simply that it's about a fascinating person and sort of documents that person. In fact, I hardly think of this film as a documentary at all. Of course, it is at one level. But in fact, Peter Tammer, he predicted, as it were, he forecast, it was very prescient about certain experiments, certain trends in documentary that would come after this film. And particularly we can almost call it a genre now, of the reenactment. And films that came after Journey to the End of Night, like Shoah by Claude Lanzmann about the Holocaust. The film, which was very widely seen and discussed, The Act of Killing by Joshua Oppenheimer, which is about the Indonesian mass killings of the mid-60s. And some of Werner Herzog's films, like Little Dieter Needs to Fly, made in about 1997, where, a man who survived in the jungle and also had to kill people in order to survive, Herzog takes him back to the places in the jungle where he was and kind of prompts him to relive. So this form, or this genre of reenactment in documentary, is really very close to, we might call it, psychodrama. It's a sort of a therapeutic acting out, a sort of a reliving in actions, in gestures, in words, in speech, supposedly, in a way, with some kind of therapeutic gain or some kind of therapeutic resolution. But of course, that's exactly what Bill Niamh in Peter's film does not find. He's not finding any kind of therapeutic release or closure at all. There's the only form of closure that the film suggests is through the quotes from the writer Louis Ferdinand Céline. Of course, he wrote a book called Journey to the End of Night. And for Céline, it's a question of telling the truth that you know, that you've seen, that you've witnessed the worst of the human race. And if you can spew all that out, if you can get all that out into a book, out of your mouth, into a film, that's the goal. That's the only goal, and perhaps the only therapy, certainly according to Céline. Now, if we put Journey to the End of the Night in this kind of bracket of films that I've mentioned that are, in some sense, using a psychodrama of reenactment, we find some very, very interesting things that are unique to Peter's film, which is that it's not like a Herzog film where Bill Neve is, taken back to Papua New Guinea to sort of walk around and point at trees and remember that he killed the guy right there, And Herzog, there's a slight touch of sadistic cruelty. He's sort of pushing people to relive and to break down and to cry and so on. Well, I don't think Peter had to do any pushing of Bill Neve at all. He seems to be caught in almost like a trance-like state, this sort of ritual state of reliving, of reimagining, of re-seeing. And here we come to what is like very pure, very direct, very simple, very minimal about Peter's film. Is that, the first time that we see him in this state of retelling, he's kind of looking frame left and looking frame right. He's addressing people. He's imagining things. Oh, look, here's this now. Oh, can't you remember this? He's kind of bringing these things back into his mind, into his memory. There's almost a feeling that like he's a child. He's a child kind of play acting to bring these things back. But of course, it's horrifying things that he's reliving, that he's in some sense attempting to work through. Now, in the film, there's really only two kinds of scenes. There are some brief glimpses of ordinary life, everyday life between Bill and his wife and another guy, perhaps their son, I don't know. And we see them, betting on the races. She's cooking dinner, making jokes about she's going to go on strike and so on. And we see Bill on the roof fixing the water tank. So there's everyday things. And then it's just like a hard cut to Bill in the midst of his psychodramatic reliving. And as I say, I don't believe that Peter had to kind of prompt him or push him or goad him in any way to do that. But what's important, I think, is that Peter resists all the usual TV documentary attempts to, have interviews with his wife that maybe could explain, like, does Bill do this every day, every night of his life? Does he reenact things in front of people, in front of his wife, in front of his family members? Does he purely do it for himself, like alone in a room? And what did prompt him to do it for Peter's camera? This is a question that certainly I'd like to ask Peter is how did he get to that point with Bill, that Bill would agree to reenact these things for a camera? Now, there's no, manipulation of the footage. There's some editing, there's some arranging of scenes, but there's no cutaways, right? It's not like, Bill looks out of screen and then we cut to a chair that he's looking at. Or there's none of these kind of typical games. There's no music score, no treatment of the sound. You don't need to treat the sound because that ticking clock behind Bill as he speaks is already incredibly expressive enough in its stark simplicity and directness. So I think this is a very special film, and that it finally moves around to exploring through the loose chronology of Bill's account, we finally come to all of these moral issues of the difference between killing and murder, and we're in the middle, as it were, of Bill's mind in this sort of mess of, on the one hand, kind of quite racist attitudes towards the Japanese, but on the other hand, the horrors that he actually lived through and saw in the war, and the terrible contradiction between being a soldier trained to kill, in a sense, and then taking this step further in what he thought at that moment was a kind of a righteous killing, a righteous act of murder. And the film really poses that question to us. Like, it doesn't give us an answer, it doesn't give us a moral. Through its quotes from both Céline's book and the Bible, the book of Job, it's a bit like a Terrence Malick film. It's a bit like The Thin Red Line at the level of, we see that, in a sense, the best and the worst of the human race, and we are left to think about that, to explore that in whatever way we can. So thanks again for this opportunity, and I hope you have a good discussion about really this great Australian film, Journey to the End of Night. Thank you.